Hi guys, Luetin here, and Total War Warhammer is upon us, and I'm here to give you my first thoughts about the game. Now, most of you know that I am a huge fan of Games Workshop and primarily Warhammer 40,000, so I'll say right from the start, keep in mind I am generally very enthusiastic about any Warhammer related subject. With that said though, I strongly believe this game offers something for veteran Warhammer players and complete newcomers alike, as well as obviously fans of the Total War series. It's a massive element. Games Workshop creates some of the most rich and engaging worlds in the genres of fantasy and science fiction, and if you've never looked at those, you should get on board right now. And then you combine that with Creative Assembly, who have this rich history of strategic games through the Total War series. It's a fantastic combination. Warhammer and 40k share many of the same factions and location atmosphere. They're both worlds plagued by unending war and a brutal battle for faction survival, with dire threats coming from all angles to topple their fragile positions of power in the world. Total War Warhammer is Creative Assembly's first outing into a fantasy world, and I think it couldn't have come really at a better time. The classic historical settings for past Total War games have been expanded on successively and with great detail, but a change in a step sideways is always a good thing. To take a look with fresh perspective is a great opportunity to reinvigorate the series, much as we all hope Battlefield will do with its foray into the past. With magic, monstrous creatures, undead, flying units, Warhammer is certainly a brave new world for Total War, and for anyone unfamiliar with Games Workshop titles, it'll be a baptism of fire. In Total War Warhammer, you will play as one of 4 factions in the main campaign: the Empire, Dwarves, Greenskins, the Orcs, and Vampiric Counts. Bretonnia is available only in multiplayer battles, and Chaos, the 6th faction, is also available, but it's a DLC. However, if you purchase the game in the first week, they include this faction for free. You do not need to have pre-ordered. Now, this change of heart to offer it free in the first week no doubt came about after the community nearly imploded. It was announced for pre-order or DLC only originally. It's excellent they made this change, but I still feel the choice to include Chaos in this way, a faction that is very clearly going to be a popular one, if not the most popular. It's clear why it was obviously singled out as a DLC or originally a pre-order bonus. I'm not sure who decides such things, but it was a poor choice and will without any doubt have caused a lot of resentment amongst players. But this is just the way games are done now. Why this was decided though, I have no idea. It clearly puts a sour taste onto a release that many people are hugely excited for. Anyway, let's try not to dwell too much on that and focus on the rest of the game, because despite business choices, this game is excellent and doesn't deserve the unfortunate shadow of that hanging over it. If you've never played a Total War game before, it's a strategic struggle, not just in the literal battles themselves, but also to control your territory through the campaign, while also reaching out to conquer new lands. In the battles, you'll generally control some standard, slightly medieval style units such as spearmen, sword and axe-wielding warriors, cavalry both ranged and shock. Ranged units also like archers or muskets, and heavy siege weapons like catapults. All of these units though in the Warhammer world have their own unique take on the classic units, so you get interpretations like the Orc Doom Divers, the Dwarven Cannon, or Empire Mortars. In Total War Warhammer, you also now have access to flying units, monstrous creatures, and powerful individual characters, some who wield magic. These heroes are easily capable of throwing themselves into any fight. Most of your leaders in previous Total War games were not especially capable of taking care of themselves when facing multiple enemies, so you generally had to protect them reasonably well, not let them be engaged by, say, a huge charge. Not so much in Total Warhammer. The heroes can really dish out the punishment, and when teamed up with a couple of other units, are a powerful combo to smash your enemy. A little word on magic, which is generally used by these lone characters. There was a lot of speculation about how powerful these effects would be in game, and I think a lot of fear from sort of veteran Total War players about them sort of interfering and breaking too much of the existing mechanics there. These had never before appeared in a Total War game. The fear of them being extremely overpowered and just wiping out units was a worry for people. Now, this seems to have been balanced very well though. You're limited on how many spells you can cast per battle based on the changing winds of magic. These tides will be different each time you play, and you can get a random determination which you can gamble on for more or less at the start of the battle. This is very similar to the tabletop game where you roll to determine how much magic you have before a battle. So magic is basically a support tool, but it's still powerful if you used right. So far, I've found that buffing or debuffing as you engage an enemy is the best way to use them, to give your units an edge and try and wipe out a unit quickly so that you can take control of a battle. The damaging magic powers tend to be erratic or random, so using them only when you have a good chance to hit multiple enemy units safely is a wise choice. The campaigns lead you in more gently than with previous titles, but they do an excellent job of explaining your position in the world, what your objectives are, and helping you understand how to build your empire. You generally will start with a city and some local concerns to address. After that, it's up to you how to reach out in the world, and that's where the learning curve rises sharply. This game is going to appeal to players who I am sure have never looked at Total War or maybe even a Warhammer game either, so a well put together tutorial section which helps where you need it is critical. I found that on both the campaign and battle tutorials they did an excellent job of quickly and clearly highlighting what it was you were supposed to be doing. The campaigns, of which I have to say I've only really given an overview into them, as their length can easily be over 100 turns, give a nice variation between factions and feel different enough you'll want to try them all out. This is bolstered by the fact that the unit roster for each is diverse enough that again you'll have to approach each combat very differently. Dwarves being more defensive, orcs being more offensive, and so on. Add on to the campaigns the quests as well. These are small narrative based events which can gain you extra rewards and are again an embellishment on top of the existing campaign. While not essential, they are interesting and rewarding enough to be worth your time to seek out. One of my smaller criticisms of the game is that units and the battles they engage in just look so bloody good. Okay, it's not really a criticism, but it is a frustration. The animations of battle are better than ever, and you find yourself wanting to continually zoom in on the action, especially when the monstrous creatures or characters are getting involved. You can remove all the UI and enjoy the beautiful sight of an Empire infantryman having his head bitten off by a giant. You cannot dwell too long on this though, as you really have to keep track of what's happening on the battlefield. Changes will happen fast. I'm always cautious of giving too much credit to those graphics though, because I believe the underlying game mechanics to be far more important. As a designer and an artist that might seem a little bit surprising, but it has to be said, the world of Warhammer has really been done justice here. The only thing I wish is that there was a little bit more customization options to your army when it comes to choosing the faction's look or feel. I mean really going deep into the customization. This was always a part of the Games Workshop hobby, and as a person who's been very involved in that, to be able to put your own mark on the characters you control, and with every incarnation of a video game from Games Workshop, I wish you had that same freedom, but it rarely comes in there. I mean, that's quite a personal touch, but I always want to see that in games. Most Total War games campaigns are the kind of thing where you want to sit down and play for an hour, but end up actually playing 5, and Total War Warhammer is no exception. The pacing changes that happen, even in the early game, are engaging and pull you into the world. The backdrop of Warhammer lore is rich enough to suck you in, and it's probably one of the strongest elements of the game. This has always been a strong suit for any game based around a Games Workshop title. The vast lore that exists is an unbreakable foundation for the game. To me, with that behind you, it should be nearly impossible to screw it up. A Warhammer based game, it has so much strength there behind it. And from what I've played so far, it's starting to feel like that with this game. There are a slew of Games Workshop titles out or on the horizon. Battlefleet Gothic, which I must play. I need to make time to play that. A new Space Hulk, Dawn of War 3. But right now, Total War Warhammer is certainly enough to satisfy my appetite for unending war. And I think some people are going to find it hard because, I'm putting together very little criticism of the game here, but to be quite honest with you, I've found it very difficult to find much to criticize with this. Other than the Chaos DLC element, I haven't really found any issues with the game which I found particularly frustrating, poorly executed, or, lacking in any shape or form, which is pretty unusual. I can usually think of something to say about a game where I feel like they could have gone this, they could have done this, but honestly, I really haven't found it. I've enjoyed every aspect of it. I haven't found anything particularly limiting. Compared to other titles, it doesn't seem to be suffering the same issues. People always go back to Rome and Rome 2 and the issues that were there. I don't really feel like that's happening in this game either. So again, it's just a weird one. And I have to say, from looking around today, I was looking at some other reviews, and my opinion on reviews, but anyway, there was looking at some reviews that people have put out, and again, similarly, very high scoring. I think this is one of these games which has just been executed incredibly well. The fact that it has the Games Workshop Warhammer element coming into it as well really strengthens, and as I say, it's a really great sidestep for Total War, and I think that freshness that the Warhammer fantasy element brings into it is the thing that really pushes it up beyond what it would just be if it was just a standard historical Total War game. If you're the kind of player who wants to just set up lots of custom battles or fight friends in multiplayer, which I'll be honest, that player is generally me, then Warhammer has you covered as well. The variation between the units in the roster is going to make for some very challenging setups. The question is going to be how flexible are the tactics available for all those setups. With Total War, battles of equal points, often one side could dominate, providing they had the correct tools to counter the enemy. This is why often me and Flame would come up with some gentleman's rules as to how to battle. Our system usually worked as follows. We decide a point limit for our army, we hit the randomize button to give us a random selection of units. We then have 2 changes each to swap out units we felt didn't fit or we wanted to improve upon. This system meant that we would both have to deal with a random setup that may or may not suit a playstyle we enjoyed. This helped to remove a natural advantage for a player and would generally give us a more interesting multiplayer dynamic, rather than just going all out defense or attack or raider, long range or whatever. Choosing your ideal setup is always an interesting dynamic as well, of course, but sometimes having to deal with what you're given is far more stress inducing and leaves you learning on the go. The combination of Warhammer and Total War feels very natural, not a forced marriage. They complement each other very well indeed, and while I desperately would love to see 40k played on this style of combat and scale, I have to admit it suits the fantasy of Warhammer far more. I suppose the only thing to say is where are the other factions. I desperately want to play Lizardmen, Skaven, Elves. I hope these come quickly on the back of the release, but unlike previous Warhammer titles, this is difficult to predict. With the level of detail and complexity placed in each faction, it's hard to know if we'll see any of these other factions beyond release. I feel like it's likely, but I mean, who can really say? If they are, then it certainly should be as a major DLC. I hope that this is certainly only the beginning for the alliance between Total War and Warhammer. If you're an experienced player of Warhammer, then names like Kov Franz, Thorgrim Grudgebearer or Grimgor Ironhide will be enough to get your blood pumping. If not, then they soon will. As I stated, Total War Warhammer benefits from Games Workshop's rich and involving lore. It also provides the game with an impressive roster of units to enable some of the most engaging battles to date in the Total War series. While the rock, paper, scissors mechanics between units still exists, this incarnation is more open to individual embellishment than ever before. With your flying units, your monstrous creatures, vampiric counts having no ranged ability, this makes for a world where Total War is turned upside down for the better. Players will have to discover new strategies to overcome their enemies and counter an unforgiving existence. This game offers the most appeal I have seen for a long time for players new and old to the series. The title of this game seems very appropriate, as the world of Warhammer is without doubt one of total war.